Hello, welcome back to this series of presentations on St. Michael and All Angels Cathedral in Kelowna, British Columbia. Ancient church structures are interesting records, usually in wood, stone, and glass. They're kind of like storybooks that speak about the beliefs of past generations, and I think this is why we find them interesting. In many ways, they describe what were the ultimate realities for people of the past. Things like life, death, God, themselves, their place in life and society. This is not generally true of most other forms of buildings, particularly modern buildings, which are much more functional, much more pragmatic, built for specific purposes and functions that change with the passage of time. In our last session, I introduced the history of St. Michael and All Angels, and I noted that the building committee that was put together in 1908 to select a design for a new church asked for a structure that was in the ecclesiastical Gothic design. I'd like to look at this design, the Gothic design. It's also known as the Gothic Revival design. What is it? Where does it come from? What does it mean? A popular architectural movement that began in England in the mid-18th century, went through to the end of the 19th century, and spread to all parts of the world. All the features of this design are now to be experienced within St. Michael and All Angels Cathedral. The situation at that time was in the midst of the Industrial Revolution in England. There had been a growing dissatisfaction with the grey drabness that affected all aspects of society. People were simply fed up with the grime and the grunge. They were suspicious of new inventions, of new machines that seemed to stifle local art and destroyed, in many cases, cottage industries that had existed for years. There was a general grayness to life. And so people wanted something better. And an interest started to revisit the life and styles of a previous age. It was the age of the Gothic cathedral, an age that began in the mid-11th century and ran through the 12th, 13th, and 14th centuries. Well, this new style came to be known as Neo-Gothic, or sometimes Gothic Revival. It was also called Victorian Gothic, and sometimes Jigsaw Gothic, or even Collegiate Gothic when it was used in academic buildings, such as, for example, the universities of Oxford and Cambridge. Beginning in Victorian England, it grew and spread to other parts of the world right into the 20th century. And there are many, many examples of Gothic revival in Canada. For example, the Parliament buildings in Ottawa, as well as hundreds of important public buildings and churches, including our own St. Michael's in Kelowna. The Gothic Revival sought to revive the principles of the glorious age of the Gothic Cathedral, an age which began in northern France in the mid-12th century with the rebuilding of the Basilica of St. Denis near Paris, and also the Cathedral of Sens in 1140 and Canterbury Cathedral in 1130. Some of these principles or ideas or characteristics are to be seen in St. Michael's Kelowna today. What are some of these principles? Well, the first is that God is recognized as the master architect, bringing order out of chaos in the cosmos. The Gothic Cathedral reveals the beauty and order that God made in the universe. A quote from the Wisdom of Solomon says, "Thou hast ordered all things in measure, number, and weight." That quote represents the worldview of the Middle Ages. Geometry was one of the greatest of the liberal arts of the Middle Ages. And it sought to describe God as creating a world that was beautiful as well as it was proportionate. Beauty and truth were linked together and could not be separated. One can admire this exquisite beauty of proportion, color, texture, and light in our own cathedral today. So the cathedral was the quintessential evidence of this beauty and order. And it was the most important notion behind this was the idea of proportion. The philosophers from the time of St. Augustine in the 4th century spoke about arithmetical ratios and the metaphysical meaning of these ratios. The supreme ratio was 1:1. It represented equality and symmetry in creation. In order of rank came the other ratios of 1:2, 2:3, and 3:4. These ratios applied to the parts of the cathedral, its length, its width, its height, the dimensions of the nave, the chancel, the central crossing, the narthex, the ambulatory, the apse. These ratios could be seen visually in the square and the rectangle and the triangle. These relationships in geometry and architecture were a reflection of the ultimate reality of the divine origin of the cosmos. Music, too, was the sister of geometry. It also reflected the mind of God. Musical intervals were based on arithmetical ratios and have a metaphysical meaning. They saw proportion not only in nature but in music and geometry, and the new cathedral design of the 12th century was an image of this wondrous ordering of nature. So the great medieval cathedrals of this period were essentially theological statements, statements of what people believed about the ultimate realities of life, of death, of God, of their place in the universe. When Canterbury Cathedral was consecrated in 1130, King Henry I was present, and he swore a royal oath, quoting from Scripture. He said, "Awesome is this place. Truly it is the house of God and the gateway to heaven." So everything about a Gothic cathedral, both inside and outside, from its majestic profile to its soaring height, the proportion of length to width and height, whatever happened when you crossed the threshold of the west portal, you were entering the heavenly realm, or at least as close as you could get to it on this side of death. It was literally and figuratively the presence of the saints, the angels, and the archangels. Now the builders and scholars of this time, men like the Cistercian abbot Suger of St. Denis Abbey, and the master builders of Chartres and Canterbury and hundreds of later cathedrals, insisted on a structural autonomy based on mathematics and proportion and music. And much of this was taken up in the Gothic revival movement 600 years later. So you see, the Gothic revival movement was more than a return to pointy arches and frivolous decoration in stone and wood. It was more searching of the past to find truth and beauty for the present and future. In a Gothic revival church such as St. Michael's, you will see some of these ancient features. First of all, the high vaulted roof and the decorative ceilings. When you first walk into a church such as this, you almost naturally look upwards at the ceiling to discover the intricate woodwork, the hammer beams, the intricate interlacing of wood. In other buildings, that would all be in stone. Secondly was the placement of 3 aisles. There's a center aisle, the most important one. It leads straight to the altar. The altar is the focal point of any church. There are 2 other aisles too, on the north and south sides. These are under lower roofs or arcades, and they're known as bays. The high walls of the nave and the chancel are often pierced by arched windows. The double or sometimes triple layer of stories in the building as you look at its profile. The topmost profile, the topmost layer, I guess, is called the clerestory, or clear story, because it's filled with windows that flood the church with light. Then, of course, there is the orientation of the church itself in an east-west direction, which itself is a reflection of the path of the sun in the natural world, and also a reflection of the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the grave, and also a reminder of our own baptism from death to life, from darkness to light. And finally, the geometric ratios that I've spoken about, the proportions of the three main areas, the narthex, the nave, the chancel or sanctuary. Well, that's a little bit about the background and structure of the Gothic design and its influence on the Gothic revival. Next time we'll talk about light and its metaphysical meaning in the Gothic architecture. So thanks for dropping by. I hope you've enjoyed this. Look for you next time.